There's never a good time. There's always class happening somewhere on campus. And that's good, right? That's what we're supposed to do here. So I am so excited to see all of you here this afternoon. I am Dr. Keith. I'm one of the advisors, along with Dr. Traers, for the Gay Straight Alliance on campus. And we've been talking about after the summer and the legalization of gay marriage. What's next, right? That's the question. What's next? Where do you go from here? Like, what are the next questions? And what are the next? What happens because of this and that kind of thing. And so we, DeMarcus, do I see DeMarcus? There he is, good. We had a panel and he did all of this work, all this amazing work to get all of these amazing folks here. So yay. So I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves to you, and then Dr. Nicholson has questions for them, and they're going to answer the questions, and then there'll be a question and answer session at the end if you have questions for them. So come in. All right. You're going to start over here and we'll go that way, and then let Dr. Nicholson in.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Jeff Willard, and I am a volunteer and representing Georgia Equality here today. I'm also second vice president of the MGSU of Georgia.
My name is Charlie Cox. I'm an attorney here in Macon. I had the good fortune of representing Flint Dollar, who's on the huge screen behind us, kind of like the Wizard of Oz. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Flint, you want to go next?
Sure, I'm Flint Dollar. I was a teacher in Macon at Mountain Salem Academy, and I am currently a graduate student in music education at Indiana State University in Terre Haute, Indiana.
I'm Lori Johnson. I teach in the political science department at Mercer, that school down the road. And I teach in the area of constitutional law and the U.S. legal system.
Some of you may already know me. My name is Michael Stewart. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Student Affairs here at Georgia State University.
All right, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Nicholson, a professor here at Georgia State, and it's my honor to moderate the panel for you guys today. So we have a set of questions that DeMarcus was wise enough to come up with, and I am going to try to formulate those into a cohesive set of questions, so we just make the panel flow. We're going to start with an open question that's going to be open to the panel. So how it will work is I'll present some questions. Anyone on the panel, feel free to answer the question, make comments or whatever you like. You don't have to answer if you don't want to. We'll take it out of your paycheck. But please feel free to comment if you like. There's no time limit, but if we feel like you're going a little long, I may give you a little kick in the pants, okay? All right, so let's go with the first question. Do you believe it should have been the Supreme Court's job to legalize same-sex marriage in the states? And if not, do you think Georgia would have ever done it on their own? We can start with Flint, if you don't mind.
Sure. Unfortunately, I believe that we live in a society where we have to litigate things. There's a long process for lobbying, and it's almost just as long for a court ruling. But in this case, I do not believe that the Supreme Court overstepped. I do think we had to rely on them to make that decision. And also, unfortunately, I believe that Georgia would have been one of the last states to legalize same-sex marriage if it had been left up to that process.
Can I follow on that really quick? Why do you say that, Flint? Why do you think Georgia would have been the last?
Because part of it's the tradition. It's always been this way, so why change it? If it's working for us now, why change something that's not broken in the blinder world of it's not broken? There's a point where you only look this far, you can't see what's on the outskirts.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Jeff?
I think eventually we would have gotten there, but it would take some time. And Dr. King said that justice delayed is justice denied. And so having to wait for that would have been really unfortunate. But the good thing is that when you look at the demographics and you look at the polls, things are definitely going our way. And the reason I say that, we're just a little over 50% as far as the American public being in favor of same-sex marriage. I think it's around 50–70%. But when you look at the millennials, and you poll them, 70% of millennials are in favor of same-sex marriage. And believe it or not, 61% of young Republicans under 30 favor same-sex marriage, and 43% of white evangelical Protestants also favor it today. Those numbers are only going to go up because we've seen in states where same-sex marriage has become legal before the Supreme Court's decision that the acceptance of it has gone up. So yes, eventually it would, and Nate Silver, who is a statistician and also predicts, his record of prediction is very good. He predicted that Georgia would have been the fourth to the last state to accept this.
So both Republicans who are under 30 are in favor of same-sex marriage?
That's correct. Nationally, again, it's under even the evangelicals we're seeing is moving in that direction. Now, obviously, the evangelicals aren't quite there yet, because they're only at 43%, but that's going true with the younger generation.
Let me follow with you, Jeff, on some of the statistics you just gave, which I feel are actually very important numbers. Why do you think this generation is a lot more accepting than previous generations?
Well, I think in previous generations, people were very closeted. This was something that was kept secret, and people didn't admit to. Now today, the younger people are out, and they are out to their friends. And if you like somebody as a person, it's very difficult to discriminate against them. So I think that's the reason that you see these numbers moving in the direction that they're moving.
Well, part of your question was whether or not it was the Supreme Court's job to make this decision. And the Supreme Court answered that question in its opinion in the Overflow case. And I'll just read a little bit of that. And that's all the preparation I'm doing. So I'm going to go read this right now. But the majority opinion said the dynamic of our constitutional system is that individuals need not await legislative action before asserting a fundamental right. The nation's courts are open to injured individuals who come to them to vindicate their own direct personal stake in our basic charter. An individual can invoke a right to constitutional protection when he or she is harmed, even if the broader public disagrees and even if the legislature refuses to act. The idea of the Constitution, quote, was to withdraw certain subjects from the vicissitudes of political controversy, to place them beyond the reach of majorities and officials, to establish them as legal principles to apply by courts. So, that's a pretty emphatic statement that it's the court's job to make this constitutional decision. Whether you agree or disagree with what they said is a different matter, but our system has been premised on the courts deciding these constitutional matters for a long time, and I think that's kind of woven into our political fabric now, that we expect the court to make constitutional decisions, even difficult constitutional decisions, even controversial constitutional decisions.
Yeah, I want to work on this one just because it's right in my wheelhouse, so I don't want to miss it in case there's another question I don't know how to answer. One thing I would say was that this Supreme Court decision didn't come out of the blue. There were lots of preceding Supreme Court decisions that were building up to this, whether you want to go as far back as the Loving versus Virginia case, where the Supreme Court said that Virginia's anti-miscegenation laws were unconstitutional, that said blacks couldn't marry whites, and the emphasis in that case was on the fundamental right of marriage. The Lawrence versus Texas case that overturned Bowers versus Hardwick, which had to do with consensual sexual acts between homosexuals. There was a Colorado initiative that the Supreme Court struck down, and then just really recently, the Supreme Court's decision on Proposition 8 and on the federal DOMA. So this opinion didn't come out of the blue. If you've been paying attention, you knew the Supreme Court was working its way to this. And in fact, really the only question in this opinion was, how far the precedent was going to go. But I would also say that there was a strong, vehement for justice dissent in this case, and they made the argument very emphatically that it was not the Supreme Court's job. And so all the justices were not convinced. They got a majority of 5, but those dissenters felt very strongly about it, and their dissents are, quoted and relied on by people who still would argue it wasn't the Supreme Court's role, that this should have been a democratic process, and that and the fact that it was going in the favor of marriage equality was all the more reason to let it continue to go. I think what Charlie said is a great explanation of the majority, but I would just mention that there were 4 justices who strongly disagreed with that as the role of the court.
They were all
Not a surprise either that those justices, Roberts, Alito, Thomas, and Scalia, would disagree. But especially Scalia's dissent was quite emphatic, and lots of, maybe histrionic language about what this is going to mean for democracy.
Michael?
The first part of the question about whether or not it's the Supreme Court's job or not, I will leave that to the more scholarly members of the panel. But having been born and raised in Georgia, I feel very confident that if the Supreme Court had not made this decision, I don't know that I agree with Nate Silver that we would have been the 4th to the last. I would probably go closer to the end of the spectrum. I don't know that Georgia ever would have, but then again, people surprise me, and so maybe we would have. I don't know, but that's just been sort of my experience, that I think we would have.
Georgia didn't ratify the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote until the 70s. Really?
And Flint, feel free to jump in if you want. We can see
Okay.
you right there too, so don't feel left out. All right, let's move on to the next question. Should homosexuality be classified as a choice or a natural characteristic? And either way, should it be protected under the 14th Amendment? And I'm going to start with Charles, if you don't mind, because I would like for you to give us some synopsis of the 14th Amendment.
Oh my
Kind of
gosh.
get an understanding.
Pop quiz.
I can do that if
Okay,
you I teach it all the time.
I'm going to punt immediately.
Basically, the 14th Amendment has 3 main clauses in it. There's the Equal Protection Clause, the Due Process Clause, and what's called the Privileges and Immunity Clause. Privileges and Immunity Clause kind of got written out a long time ago, so nobody really pays much attention to it. But yeah, under the Equal Protection Clause, there are 2 ways that a law can get increased scrutiny by the courts. One, if it uses a classification that's problematic, things like race, gender, ethnicity, religion, or if it involves a fundamental right. Primarily those involve voting and things like the democratic process. Well, the Overveld opinion did not really go with the equal protection, classification of homosexuals argument. It went more with the marriage as a fundamental right argument. And so that, the question, as it indicates, leaves open the idea of whether the status of homosexuality is deserving of increased scrutiny and protection under the Equal Protection Clause. And the Supreme Court didn't, at least not so far, has said that. And I think in part, one of the struggles the court has with that is that there's some situations where they think it maybe could matter in a law. That's one of the reasons they struggled with gender for a long time, because even though in the context of race, we're pretty much all accepting of it shouldn't matter, in gender, we know sometimes it does matter. There's certain biological differences between males and females that might actually matter, especially with regard to procreation. So I think because the Supreme Court's reluctance to create that protected classification for homosexuality was in part kind of a compromise to say we can agree on the marriage rationale, we might not be able to agree on the protected classification rationale. If it had, then lots of other types of differentiation between gays and lesbians and straight people would have been subject to review too. And of course, ultimately, things like employment discrimination and healthcare discrimination and those kinds of things would have been more problematic. So Does that help some give you a sense of the 14th Amendment and sort of where we stand? I think your question was also where we're going to go.
Pretty much.
And I think for now, the Supreme Court's probably not going to open that door just yet.
Well, don't you think one of the problems with approaching it as a protected class or category under the 14th Amendment is that we, meaning we as a society or we as the courts, can't figure out what to do with the continual debate about is homosexuality an immutable characteristic? Is it a choice or is it are you born with it? And nobody knows how to come down on that issue, and so nobody knows how to tackle the issue of is it a protected category?
Right. Although, I mean, I think that that way of thinking about protected categories is already a little vulnerable because, you know, okay, we think of race as an immutable characteristic, but it's really not. And of course, there's all kinds of racial differentiations now that there didn't used to be. Gender is much more fluid than we want to acknowledge a lot of times. And the same, you know, and then the question of religion, well, that's not an immutable characteristic. You can be Jewish and decide not to be Jewish, but we usually think you shouldn't have to make that choice. You shouldn't be discriminated against because it's your religion, even though it is technically a choice. And so I think that, you know, that's sort of a similar kind of argument with regard to homosexuality is even if it is a choice, should you be penalized for it? Should it really matter?
Jeff, you want to?
Well, I think that this question comes up many, many times, especially when conservatives raise it, is to whether someone chooses to be gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender. And I think the answer, in my view, is that they do not. This is not something that you decide. You get up one morning and decide, well, you know, I could have had a VA. No. Most people, this is set from early on. Now, you do have people that don't want to be. They want to resist their feelings. So they either deny or they repress it. But I think for most people, this is not something that you choose. This is part of you. This is who you are. And I think that the psychiatric and the psychological community has come around to that to say this is not changeable in most people. That there really should be therapy to change someone's sexual orientation. In fact, it could be dangerous, whether they go through therapy or they go through prayer to try to change themselves. That really, in most cases, the majority of cases, it doesn't work because this is part of their personality. So I resist this, and the question I always like to ask people that are straight, is when did you choose to be straight? You know, what day did you get up and say, well, I'm not sure what I should be, so I'm going to choose to be straight? I think if you're honest, that just doesn't happen. That didn't happen, and I don't think anyone here could say they made that conscious decision. I think sometimes with bisexuals, now bisexuals also really don't have a choice because they are bisexual, but they can make a choice how they want to live their life. That's true, who they want to marry, you know, because we don't allow polygamy. So they have to choose somebody, either someone of their same sex or someone of an opposite sex. But definitely, I think if people are honest, this is something that is not. This is not something that's chosen.
Flint or Mike?
Yeah, from experience, I would that had you been Jew, I would have chosen to not be gay. I went through comparative therapy in college and put myself through that because of the way that I was raised. And if anyone could have made the choice, I would have done it. For 4 years, I went through comparative therapy. And what that did to me and my psyche was horrible. And it was not until I moved to Georgia that I fully healed, and still maybe not fully healed from that process. So the choice for me, I tried to make the choice and it didn't work, it didn't happen. My choice was to accept who I am for what I am and to be happy in who I am and in what I am. And that was the only choice I had to make. Just to acknowledge this is who you are and be okay with that. And as a evangelical Protestant, white Protestant, and my faith system, that's what came into question next, was how to reconcile that with the way that I was raised and what I believe as a Christian. And what I came to conclusion was I am more honest now with who I am and with who my God is than I was before. And owning that part of me and being okay with who I believe God created me to be was one of the most freeing experiences of my life. Saying, you know, it is okay. And that reconciliation happening between me and God allowed me to be more honest with myself and more open with myself. So then I'm able to be more honest and more open with people that I encounter every day. Is it a choice? For me, it was not. I can't say that for anybody else. I can only say that for me. And I know that some people feel like they have to make a choice. And my advice is the only choice you have to make is to be who you are and to be comfortable with who you are. And don't let society pressure you into being something that you're not. Should it be classified as a protected class? In my experience, yes. What I went through and what I dealt with, had I been protected, it would not have been an issue.
Can you tell
It's
them a little
sad
about what you went through, Flint, because they might not know?
Oh, yeah. That's fine. In May of last year, I was fired from teaching at a school in Macon when the announcement was made that I was getting married. I was open with the administration of the school when I was hired. I am in a same-sex relationship. I am living with my partner, and that was okay. But when it was brought to the attention of the bishop of the Diocese of Savannah that I was getting married, he called the school and said, if you continue to employ him, it will be against the wishes of this office. So the school rescinded the contract offer I was given based on the fact that I was getting married. Not that I was gay, not that I was in a relationship, but that I was getting married. Had I been a protected class, that would have been illegal. Since then, we filed a discrimination suit with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, who did rule that I was discriminated against based on gender stereotyping. And if you follow the EEOC as of late, they have actually classified homosexuality in the same vein as gender discrimination. So now if someone is fired for being gay or lesbian or bisexual, that's the same as saying we're discriminating against you for being male or female.
I'll echo some of what Flint said. Growing up in Georgia as a Southern Baptist and struggling with your sexuality was a challenge. And, you know, trying to sort of pray the gay away didn't work for me. And I did. I prayed, and I continually prayed, and continually felt like I was failing, as not only as a person, but also as a Christian. And that wears you out very quickly. You know, is it a choice? And I agree with what Flint said. My choice, and I had this discussion with my mother's pastor when I came out to her. She wanted me to talk with the pastor, and I said, if it will make you feel better, I will talk with him. Understanding nothing's going to change. And he basically said the same thing. Do you think it's a choice? And I said, no, my only choice is to be happy with who I am as a person. And I think once I was able to do that, sort of like what Flint said, once I was able to do that, I was able to start healing myself. As I started coming out to other people, I did have somebody ask me one time ask that very same question, well, you know, when did you come out? And I just sort of flipped it on them, and I said, well, when did you come out as a heterosexual person? And they couldn't answer, and they said, well, maybe you've not found the right woman yet. And I flipped it around on them and said, well, maybe you haven't either.
Yeah, and that was also, the question also asked about is a behavior, and I was telling my fellow panelists, I was involved in a panel discussion on Saturday that was not nearly as friendly as this, with a group of African-American evangelical churches. And, you know, one of the things that I think has really changed in this generation is that the notion that, I don't know how to say this more succinctly than, it's really not about sex, it's about love. And we no longer sort of think that it's really the business of the church, whether we have kids or not, whether we, you know, what kind of sex we have. I mean, I tell my students, it's not about who puts what where, you know? It's really about love. And when it's about love, how can more love be a bad thing? I mean, you know, like, if love is the fundamental principle of most religions, and they want to promote more love, how can more love be bad? And when I think of my friends and family and myself and, you know, the relationships that I know of, I went to high school with Michael's husband, so I know Tony maybe too well sometimes. But, you know, I'm just happy he's happy. Like, when you love someone, you want them to be happy and you want them to have love. And it really doesn't matter to me, like I said, what else they're doing. To me, that's not the point.
Let me follow up on something some of you said, actually. Like, you have a room here full of students who may fit into the LGBT category, right? I want to make sure that they leave here with some skills and some communication skills, particularly that they can use if they ever faced with some of these questions, particularly if someone wants to say to them, why did you choose to be homosexual? What would you say to them, or how they can answer that question for someone else, or to someone?
I think it's exactly what we said. You're choosing to be who you are, and you're choosing to be happy with yourself, and that's all anybody can ask. You know, I think when I came out, I think one of the things that my mother was most concerned about was the struggles that I was going to have to face, and she had no idea what struggles I had already faced. And I think that's part of it with anybody. It's you've got to accept yourself first before you can work on anything else. And once you do that, it does become easier. And I think knowing that you, and I say kids, and it makes me feel so much older than I am. But I think young people today are much more fortunate because we do live in a society that is far more accepting. For the most part, I know there's still pockets out there that are not. But there are places to go. There are faculty and staff on this campus who are more than willing to serve as resources and sort of, I guess, ports in the storm, for lack of a better word, that if you don't have any place else to go to feel accepting, seek us out and we'll accept you.
Yeah, I think having a support community is really critical. You know, I think I would, in terms of how to answer other people, to me there's like two avenues that come up. One is sort of the scientific avenue. We've known since Kinsey that people exist on a sexual spectrum, and their attractions are, you know, not exactly explainable scientifically, but there's certainly, we can certainly see patterns across lots of people on a spectrum. I happen to be bisexual, so sometimes that feels like it's nowheresville. But my longest relationship was with a man, but I've dated other women. To me, it doesn't feel like an either or kind of thing. It's about, do I like this person? Do I want to spend time with them? Do I, you know, want to be affectionate with them? So I think the science is actually pretty clear that homosexuality has existed forever. It's on a spectrum that we can pretty well document. And, you know, just the fact that you've never felt those urges makes sense, because not everybody is on, you know, that same place on the spectrum. I think the religious questions are a little harder, and sometimes they're harder because they're more judgmental, and that was part of what I experienced on Saturday was, I forgot how hurtful it can feel to have people throw Bible verses in your face and say, this is an abomination before God, and that kind of thing. And, you know, there are good answers. I mean, I think the
That's
best
what I'm
one.
actually trying to get to. What are some of those
Yeah,
answers that?
I mean, I think the answer that I basically gave was, you know, people pick and choose in the Bible, what they're gonna highlight and what they're gonna ignore. And there needs to be some principle by which you choose. Okay, you eat shellfish, you eat pork, you don't stone adulterers anymore, you don't segregate menstruating women. Like, those are all things in the Bible too, but we've sort of said we don't really need those things, right? But we still need this prohibition on homosexuality. And I'm like, I think it's undeniable that we pick and choose. What's important to me is what's the criteria by which we use. And a lot of people, I think, it's easy to pick homosexuality as something that's still problematic because it's a sin they can never imagine themselves committing. Yay!
We get Charles and Charles.
Well, y'all didn't know this when I was invited to be part of the panel. My dad is a retired Methodist minister. My sister is a Methodist minister. My father-in-law is a Methodist minister. I missed the boat somewhere. But, so I come from that background and come from being in the church, and that kind of flows into how I practice law and how I approach my practice of law. But the church's response to homosexuality is concerning to me, not only from a legal standpoint of what I believe people's rights should be, but also what that does with people's relationship with the church and with God. And although I come from, I grew up in South Georgia, grew up in the church, and grew up in a very traditional Orthodox setting, at the root of it, to me, the gospel is about grace. And so, I guess my suggestion, and this is, I feel funny making this suggestion because I'm not gay, I'm not bisexual, so I don't have that experience, and I don't know what that's like to deal with that. But I do know that if somebody is talking with you about your relationship with God, and what you're getting is condemnation, then you need to have a conversation about God with somebody else. Because you need to find somebody who can relate the gospel of grace and not the gospel of condemnation. So those are my suggestions.
Look for a church that's affirming and welcoming.
There may be one in Macon.
Well, there's several. When I go to High Street Unitarian Universalist, all the Episcopal churches in town are welcoming and affirming. St. Mary Methodist definitely is affirming and welcoming of all. So, I mean, I think that actually can be a really healing experience to recognize there's not one Christian view on this. Go ahead.
And I've been in church work over 20 years. And it feels like, for me, I come out every time I go for a job application. I make a very conscious decision when I go into a job interview to say, I'm gay, if you've got a problem with that, I don't need to work here, we just need to stop this now. That is a conscious decision that I make, and so I am constantly, as I job search or as I'm meeting people, coming out. And that's been difficult to do. I haven't gotten jobs because of that. And for me, that's okay, especially working in the church, because I do believe in the right, this gets into a really dicey area right now. I do believe that when you talk about the church and how you work in a church, if you're not a good fit, you're not a good fit for whatever reason that is. And I would never make a legal argument against that, except for the fact that in my situation, when I did go to the school and I applied and I said, I'm gay, I'm in a relationship, and this is the problem, I don't need to work here, they said, no, not a problem, come on, work here. So it's kind of changing the rules in the middle of the game in that respect. But I make a point of being who I am no matter the situation. And I've come up against a lot of the religious condemnation, and I've come up against a lot of judgment for that. And to me, there's always going to be that people that have that mindset. And there's nothing that I can do to change their heart. I can only affect me and get right with myself. So when I come up against those type of people that are judgmental, I choose to walk away from the situation and be who I am and be happy in who I am and not be judged by that because I don't want to judge them. That's my response.
Okay, thank you, Flint. Did you want to respond, Jeff?
I just think that it's important to be yourself and to explain, for instance, every time that I talk to someone and they ask me these questions about myself, I just explain to them, this is the way, in my view, this is the way I was born. You know, that I did not become this at one time. From my earliest recollections, this is the way I am. And I think people kind of respect that, even though they may disagree with it on a religious standpoint. But you know, it's very important when you're talking to religious people to respect their views. We're not out to try to change people's religious views within their religion. But I do think it's important to make sure that they understand that as we are respecting their views, that they should respect us as individuals and treat us with dignity. And I think that's what's important.
So we kind of talked a little bit about the legal issues and that graduated into the religious topics. So I'm going to skip past those questions and I want to ask you, how do you think same-sex marriage couples undermine the idea of a traditional family?
My graduate degree is in marriage and family therapy, which some people question because it's like, well, you've never been married. How can you be a marriage and family therapist? I'm like, well, my vet's never been a dog, but he can still help treat a dog. So anyway, I digress, sorry. But I guess one of my thoughts is somebody needs to help me define what a traditional family is these days. I don't know that maybe there was such a creature, but I don't think there is now. You know, I think for me, a traditional family is a family that loves and supports the members of that family, whether it's one parent and 3 kids or 2 dads and 2 kids or whatever it is. I think as long as there is the love and support, I think that's part of it. But I think the idea of a traditional family, I need help understanding what the other person's concept of that is.
I am the stereotypical traditional family. My wife and I have been married for 27 years. We have 2 kids. You know,
25?
no.
Picket fence?
We moved recently. We did have a picket fence at our house. So, you know, I'm the stereotypical family boy feeling like the oddball today. But the question that you asked just seems kind of odd. I mean, not odd that you would ask that, but the premise to the question is odd. I mean, how can what you do, how can that threaten my family?
Well, to a rational person, that may be the answer, but we know that question is out there.
Yeah, I mean, I know, and many people make that argument with all seriousness, but it's kind of difficult to grasp that. I mean, to me, the attitudes of condemnation are much more threatening to relationships and families than the fact that you may have a family that when I was 10 years old did not fit anything that I thought could actually be a family. But that doesn't affect my family at all.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say, sort of like what Michael said, in some ways the traditional family is a myth. It was a myth that was created for a purpose And in some ways, it's about privilege. It's about privileging certain kinds of relationships and certain models. And so, yeah, if we say there are other models of relationships that are also good, that is kind of a threat to that privilege. We are kind of saying heterosexual marriage is not the only good relationship out there. I think one of the problems with the myth was that it was never as great as it sounded in theory anyway. I mean, the traditional family has had lots of pathologies. I mean, I teach women's studies, and traditional family has not always been very friendly to women or women's rights or, their progress. And even today, it's like, okay, some heterosexual marriages are great. Others are incredibly abusive and dysfunctional. So it's not so much the gender that makes the difference, but we can tell the difference. So I think there is a sort of threat in the sense that it doesn't, for people who want to say, my relationship is the only way to do it, we're definitely challenging that and saying, maybe not. I mean, I'm single and I have been for 12 years. And I have relatives who still think I'm not really a grown-up because I've never gotten married, But that's the latest statistical shift in our population. There are more and more single people. People aren't getting married, gay or straight, for a lot of different reasons. But I still have a family. Just because I'm single doesn't mean I don't have a family. I have parents, I have sisters, I have nieces and nephews, I have adopted nieces and nephews. I mean, I'm the adopted aunt for my friends who are a gay couple who adopted 3 kids. And yeah, sometimes people say, well, isn't it sad that those kids don't have a mom? And I say, well, which mom would you like them to have? The abusive one or the neglectful one? Or the one that locked them in the bathroom for days on end? Really? That's what you would prefer for them?
Well, when conservatives speak about the traditional family, what they mean is a man and a woman who are married, living under the same roof, and raising 2.5 children. That's their definition. Now, that definition of traditional family has been on the decline since the second half of the 20th century. And that has nothing to do with same-sex couples. In fact, that started and really took a toll long before this was even possible to have marriage of same-sex couples. Today, traditional family is about 27.5% of all the families in the United States. So that really, and so therefore, the ability for same-sex couples to marry has no impact whatsoever. But for conservatives that want to see this number go up, I have a solution for them. All you have to do is slightly change the definition of traditional family. And that would mean 2 adults living under the same roof who are married and are raising children. And actually that would mean same-sex couples would be under that definition, and therefore there would be more couples living in a traditional family.
Flint, did you want to chime in on
I'm with Charlie. I think this is flawed. How in the world can my relationship affect yours? Unless I come into your relationship and interrupt your relationship fundamentally. My relationship does not affect anyone else's. So there is no way that, in my opinion, that I am undermining anyone else's relationship. I value each relationship as it is, and that's where most of my friends are. That's where my husband is. Our relationship is our business, unless we choose to make it yours. And the divorce rate does not affect our relationship. The quote-unquote living in sin rate does not affect our relationship. So I don't see how my marriage can undermine anyone else's or value anyone else's. If anything, I think it helps that we have a stable relationship. I think the biggest threat to traditional marriage is divorce. I have a stable relationship and I'm comfortable in that.
Okay. One more question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience if you have questions. what should someone do who fits into the LGBT community? What should they do if they feel like they're being discriminated against? Are there, is there legal protection? Is there someone they can go to? How do they handle that?
Call Charlie Cox.
Well, if you feel like you've been discriminated against and you're seeking some type of legal remedy, then yeah, you need to speak to a lawyer. And if you live in Georgia and you feel like you're being discriminated against, brace yourself, because it's tough in Georgia to address that. If the basis of discrimination is you're gay or lesbian, believe it or not, it's a lot easier to have protection of transgender.
It's considered gender discrimination?
Yeah, it's considered gender discrimination, and actually the theory that we pursued with Flint's case was, we didn't make the charge that the school was discriminating against Flint because he was gay. We made the charge that they were discriminating against him because he did not comport with traditional gender stereotypes. And that's the same thing as transgender, and that's been an accepted theory under Title VII cases for a number of years. That gender discrimination is when you discriminate against somebody because they don't comport with traditional gender stereotypes. In Flint's case, a traditional gender stereotype is men marry women. He didn't comport with that, and so we kind of fit into that niche for the purposes of this case, and it was a good fit. But it's tough in Georgia because, as a rule, you are left with not many remedies if the discrimination was just because you're gay.
And the landmark case in the transgender ruling came in Georgia, believe it or not. It was Glenn versus Brumby, who actually went to the 11th Circuit of the U.S. Court of Appeals. And basically, what they argued that this individual was protected under Title VII, under the 1964 Civil Rights Act, because it covers gender. And they won on that. Now, since then, as I think our other panelists pointed out, the EEOC is accepting for all LGBT people discrimination claims based on gender. Because now they're saying that they're going to interpret the word gender in the Civil Rights Act to include everybody, all LGBT people. The problem here we have is that it has not been really confirmed for other than transgender by really the courts, and certainly not the Supreme Court. And even the transgender cases, none of them, and there's been rulings of other circuits, and we've won, but it has not gone to the Supreme Court. We don't know how the Supreme Court will view this, whether they would be open to saying, or at least 5 of them on the court, who would be willing to say that the word gender it encompasses LGBT people.
Well, as a former employment lawyer, I would actually tell you, don't talk to a lawyer first. If you feel like you're being discriminated against, and I would say this whether it's about gender, race, sexuality, religion, first you need to have a conversation. It may just be ignorance. You need to have a conversation about what's going on, your impression of it, what it means to you. Sometimes people are just like, I had no idea how that came across or what it meant. So, you do have to do some educating yourself. I think if you have the conversation and they're still not responsive, you also have the option of just removing yourself from that situation. Sort of like what Flint was saying about, when he interviews for jobs, if you're not going to be accepting of me, I don't want to be here anyway, kind of thing, to protect yourself, especially if you have support and people in your life who are going to encourage you. And then, if you want to stay in the situation and you feel like you've been wrong, then you might want to call a lawyer or talk to a lawyer, but that shouldn't be your first option.
I would say, we've sort of gone from the 10,000-foot view down. So I would say at the college, university level, if you feel that you are being discriminated against, please seek me out. It's part of my job as assistant vice president here is to make sure that students are treated fairly. Some of my colleagues don't always agree with me because I'm an advocate for the student. Now, if you screw up, I can't advocate for you for that. But if you are within your rights and if you are within what you are owed or what you deserve, then I'm going to fight for you for that. And sometimes some of my colleagues don't always appreciate that, but that's okay. We agree to disagree. But part of why I'm here.
What?
For me, there wasn't an option to go have a discussion. And I do see Lori's point about have a discussion with, and part of what we have to do is educate those around us that we really aren't different than anybody else. It is a perception of difference. And what I do in home is my business. And someone's perception of me can change because they think of what I do in my home. That's their problem. What I have to do is I have to educate and say, I'm not different from you. I'm white male and I'm a musician. I like to drink wine and read books. How does that make me different? So discriminating against me because of who I love, that could be an ignorance thing. And educating people to say, as gay, lesbian, transgender, we're still people. Then maybe it'll work and maybe it won't. There's nothing wrong in trying. For me personally, I didn't get that option. Everybody already knew me at the school. So my option was what I did. And that when I was fired, my first response was to contact parents of students and try to get my job back. I watched other teachers at the school rally the parents and get jobs back after they were not offered a contract for the teaching year. My contract was offered, signed, and then rescinded. So I tried to lobby the parents and lobby the students, and that didn't work. So my only recourse was to call a lawyer.
You also called the media too, right? I mean, I think that you were willing to speak out about
Yeah,
your situation.
That's another thing, is I did not call the media.
Oh, somebody did.
I was very careful with that because I didn't want to seem like I was trying to get the media riled up. There were parents that called the media, and the first thing that happened when the students threw a protest rally at the school, one of the parents called the local news stations and said, there's a protest rally going to happen at Mount DeSales on Friday morning. You might want to go check it out. So then I received phone calls from the 3 major news stations in Macon requesting interviews. And I granted those interviews. Part of what I was very specific in my statement was, this is the chain of events. I came out to the school when I was hired, before I was hired, and I informed the school that I was getting married in October. Everything was fine until May. In May, I was offered a contract for the next year. I signed and returned the contract, and 20-some days later, I was called in and told, we're not going to honor your contract. You didn't do anything wrong. We have no student complaints, no parent complaints. According to your evaluations, you're an exemplary teacher, but because you're getting married, we're not going to honor your contract. And that was my news story. I did not make the first call, or the second call, or the third call, but I did answer those interviews, those requests for interviews, because I wanted my story heard. And I feel that it's important when someone, I told the students this, and I kind of got some backlash from the Catholic Church for this statement. what I told my students, if you, as a human, I believe that if you witness an injustice, it is your job to stand up against that injustice. And this, to me, was an injustice. It was not right. It was not the not right way to treat someone, anyone. So it is my job, my obligation as a human to say, that's not right. And stand up for what is right, which is the equality and equal treatment of all people, no matter who you are. You should be treated with dignity and respect. So to come back at that, it's not easy. The road ahead of us is not, it's not done yet. There's still a lot of work to do. In Georgia, it's a right to work state. You can be fired for having brown hair and blue eyes. It doesn't matter. What matters is that needs to change. There's got to be change, and it starts with you. It starts with us. We have to be the change. And to make that change, we have to stand up against injustice and say, that's not right. That's not the way I believe people should be treated.
Okay.
And if we do that together, we have a stronger voice.
Thank you. I'm going to open, go real quick, Jeff.
I just wanted to say one other thing when we're talking about discrimination, and I think it's very important to point out that let's not give people that want to discriminate a weapon to discriminate against us even more. And that is, right now we have a bill pending at the Georgia legislature that would allow people to discriminate against LGBT people and others that they consider to be sinners based on religious freedom. And this is a very, very dangerous bill if it passes, because if you're LGBT, restaurants could refuse to serve you, hotels could refuse to give you a room, businesses could refuse to sell to you. This is a very, very dangerous bill, and it should be defeated. So I definitely wanted to bring this up. I knew this was one of the questions that we were going to get into, but I want to make sure we get it, at least bring it on, put it on the table. And I can talk about it even more if it comes here.
We have time, we're running out of time, so let me open it up to the audience if you guys have any questions to pose to the panel.
Do you think that our community will find same-sex marriage more acceptable now that the term illegal is no longer associated with it?
I didn't hear the very last
Do
part.
you think the community will find same-sex marriage more accepting since the term illegal is associated with it?
Personally, I mean, I think we're starting to see some of that. Again, I think it goes back, I think there's going to be pockets, particularly in Georgia, that it's going to be a struggle to get there. But, you know, I would have thought the same thing about Macon not too terribly long ago. And I've kind of been surprised, pleasantly surprised. So I think we're getting there. But like Jeff said, I think we're early on in that journey.
I do think there's a significant amount of feeling, though, that people think, okay, well, that fight's over.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to keep dealing with that. And when I say that fight's over, the people that have opposed same-sex marriage, there's a significant amount of feeling among folks, I believe, that okay, that issue's been decided, let's quit beating that issue and move on.
Yeah.
I hope that's correct.
Yeah, I think the surprise wasn't that there was a Kim Davis, is that there wasn't more of them, you know? I mean, she got so much attention because she was one of the only people who took that stand. So yeah, I do think people, like Charlie said, are saying, okay.
Yeah, and
we may disagree, but it's pretty much decided now. That was Georgia's response.
yeah, and one sign of that was how our probate courts got ready to issue marriage licenses with the explicit statement, you know, we don't want to be Alabama. You know, if this is the law, I mean, no offense, or at least not much offense, if you're from Alabama. But if this is the law, then okay, we're going to implement the law and move forward. And that was refreshing, that we didn't have our own little, you know, cluster of Kim Davis is doing whatever it is she's doing.
And as I mentioned earlier, places before the Supreme Court decision where it became legal, acceptance went up. So I would foresee that would be the same here and other places.
Any other questions? Michael?
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm president of MGSU here on Macon campus. But I really don't know how to structure my question. I guess for me coming out, I was confused on why the general population was so hateful and discriminated towards, the homosexual community, because it's like, us getting married, I don't see how that, like you said earlier, I don't see how that changes everybody everyday lives. Like, the taxes are not gonna go up, your rent's not gonna go up just because your next door neighbor is getting married. So I guess my question is, why, besides threatening the institution of marriage, why was the general population so hateful towards gay people? Like, how did it change their everyday life? How is it gonna affect them if we get married?
Yeah, when I lived in Massachusetts, I had people ask me that question all the time, and maybe it's because I was from the South and raised Southern Baptist. It wasn't hard for me to understand why they had a problem. Part of it comes from the worldview that God is judging all of us on the kind of conduct and behavior we tolerate, not just what we individually do. So if God is judging a society based on that society's practices, then under that model, it matters what you do because God's looking at all of us. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I don't agree with that, but I think that's the philosophy, is that if we as a society are tolerating things that God disapproves of, God can punish all of us. Whether it's a hurricane or whatever the latest punishment is. I also think that, what I was trying to say about privilege is also part of it. That it's not just about you're different, but I'm better and you're not as good as me. And we know what that means in the context of race. That it wasn't just blacks are inferior, but it was that whites are superior. And I think there is a sense among, maybe you'd call it heterosexism or something, that says this is the preferred relationship. This is the model that God ordained for relationships. And so the less we follow that, the less their relationship is the best. Does that make some sense? I mean, again, I don't agree with it, but I think I would explain it that way. That says, if this is the ideal and you're not following the ideal, that has consequences for all of us.
We get some other questions, Dominic.
I have a question that we discussed it in the educated, in the schools and stuff. Anybody on the panel, would you have any advice of how to get it out of the education system and get it more into the community and more talked about, like panels like this in Macon or something like that?
What's the it in your sentence? Like what?
Is there something that you would suggest to get it from the education system out more into the world, outside of just the colleges and the people the school systems and stuff like that are dealing with it to a bigger level?
I think Flint's case helped with that discussion because the stories that came out caused people to talk about it. And I say that not because I had the good fortune of being Flint's lawyer, and I'm not necessarily trying to toot our own horn, but although I'm not above that. I also just heard from people that they would hear about these stories, and people at Carlisle who were playing bridge, they would get together and they would be talking about this. And I ran into people who had heard about it and they'd seen something on the news and they would talk to me about it. And so I know this seems like a lame way to further the discussion, but to have stories in the news where you have an appealable set of facts, which Flint's case was, and then it just got the discussion going, and Flint presented himself extremely well in the media, so that he was a sympathetic figure, and people they liked Flint, they knew of people that liked Flint. And so then they were thinking, why is this happening to this nice guy? And so I just know from talking to folks, there was a lot of discussion about that. I don't know if that answers your question very well, but having events happen that become points of discussion throughout the community are the way to get those conversations started.
And I think that's one of the things that has sort of been a theme throughout is having those conversations and having those dialogues with people outside of those sort of safe spaces, because that's sort of typically what I feel colleges and universities are, is a safe space to have that discussion. But then when you get out amongst others who don't share that particular mindset, it can be a little less safe feeling. But I think it's just having that dialogue.
With neighbors and with, colleagues. I mean, I think it's tough because as a political scientist especially, there's so many issues that seem so divisive because conflict sells. The media loves conflict because that's the frame that almost everything is depicted through. But when we do actually have a chance to talk with people one-on-one, we can find common ground on lots of issues. But as long as it's at this level of, I wish I knew, can you believe such and such happened, then it's not gonna